Coming up, Joe Schoen speaks from the Senior Bowl. Updates on Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. Where do the Giants currently stand on two critical players for their franchise? Plus, looking forward to what could be a coaching search gone slightly awry. We dive in on the updates coming up next. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant podcast where we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, the healthy, wealthy, and wise Andrew Makowitz. A busy schedule today, talking about the Senior Bowl, some college players to keep an eye on, but critically, Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones. What is Joe Schoen telling us? Or maybe just kind of making stuff up. We'll see what he has to say. But before we do, we let you know, of course, that today's episode is brought to you by Personam. It is an AI-driven cyber threat detection engine. If we could detect the threats from free agency and coaching and knowing what the Giants need to do here, Personam is able to improve your vision into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats and other tools that platforms simply cannot do. Personam is always vigilant, always learning. Check out Personam today. And Andy, what we're checking out today is Joe Schoen at the Senior Bowl. We'll talk about a couple of players, some maybe rising stock here looking at the draft, but ultimately it's about two things. What's the plan with Saquon Barkley? And how bullish is Joe Schoen showing himself to be on one Daniel Jones?
Yeah, obviously it's encouraging to see Joe Schoen down at the Senior Bowl with Mike Kafka. There's been a lot of rumors circulating and swirling about whether he's going to return. He's obviously, Mike Kafka is obviously up interviewing on a second interview for the Seattle Seahawks head coaching position. But a lot of the beat writers and other people that are close to the team have speculated that maybe Kafka isn't going to be around and may take a lateral move. But first in hearing him, he kind of said, this is exciting. You get to work with all these players. They're coming out. And then he went on to also talk about like how excited he is to get back into the room and get back with all the players when he returns to the Giants. He sounded like a guy that seems like he's going to be back, and knowing Joe Schoen is there, I'm sure they've had conversations. And then it turned over to Joe Schoen talking a little bit about Saquon Barkley, saying that they've met a little bit and they're expected to meet at the NFL Combine with his agent to kind of go over some preliminary numbers. I found that pretty interesting on the Saquon front. We'll start there, Adam. Did you expect him to say anything else? Did you think that was a positive sign that they're in communication? Like, what did you take from that?
Yeah, I mean, plan to speak with Barkley's representatives, listed by, and I think these go by being sports. It's a Rock Nation, excuse me, sports, also represented by CAA and Ed Berry for Saquon Barkley. I guess, I mean, again, it still feels the same way, right? Saquon Barkley played underneath the tag a year ago. He didn't want to be doing that. The Giants, the one thing that was mentioned here, like that both sides, there's indications want to have Saquon Barkley retire a New York Football Giant. Again, wants and desires are one thing, dollars and cents are what really matter here. And when we talk about free agency and the top 50 free agents coming up on our Friday episode, we'll dive in about where Saquon Barkley stands. Is it good to hear that that's the sentiment? I will say yes, because unlike other free agent situations, there's no reason to not communicate anything one way or the other, right? Like, you don't need to protect your cards here. We've been through this a year ago. We're going to go through it again. And at least you're signaling to Saquon publicly and to his agents, hey, like, we do want to try to make this work. We do want to come to the table once again. I just wonder if they're both a little snake bit about how we walked through this a year ago and it didn't work out. I mean, it worked out for the Giants. We tagged you. Great. But now we're back to that table in the same spot.
Yeah, it's almost like, yeah, we're cordial, we're friendly, but the elephant in the room still exists where, like, you think your value is here, we think your value on the Giants is here. And it's like,
right,
that it's great that there's all these pleasantries, but at some point the rubber's going to meet the road and someone is going to have to compromise, or else Saquon Barkley is going to go out on the open market potentially. Because I don't know, Adam, do you see him playing on the franchise tag? I feel like it's in everyone's best interest to kind of not go down that path again, but maybe I'm wrong.
I do really, what I think is curious, and we've alluded to this before, is if it is, he's going to go to market because the Giants say, well, it's tag or, right? Like, tag or you're going to walk. And we said this, if he goes to free agency and the numbers don't look quite great, or, you can say, hey, you didn't get a good indication from the market. We're going to put the tag on you. And in good faith, try to negotiate again. And just bear in mind, Saquon, if we're telling you 12.5 million with the boost from the second year of the franchise tag, If the market's telling you it's 7 or 8, well, you're already ahead of the game by 4 million. So now on the tag and trying to negotiate going forward, let's keep these numbers in mind, right? If I tell you the 30 million with 25 guaranteed or something like that over 3 years, just go look at the numbers and realize that you are making out better than what the market is willing to pay you, right? So whether or not Saquon is willing to do that, because ultimately, I saw this quote from Kirk Cousins. It's not about the dollars when it comes to these negotiations, but it is about what the dollars represent, right? So, it's a fun way of saying I do want to get paid, and I also want the respect of being one of the best players at my position. I think that's what Saquon is talking about here. I wonder if he feels a little bit softer on it than maybe he did a year ago, seeing how the market is kind of coming even lower than maybe it was.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. After you saw last offseason, the only person that got over $7 million a year was Dalvin Cook. He signed late, and it was a 1 year deal. Miles Sanders got the biggest deal. I think it was like $6.5 million on a multi-year deal. Like, the market is plummeting, and guess what? There's Austin Eckler, there's Ezekiel Elliott, there's Tony Pollard, there's Saquon out there. Like, just with so many capable running backs out there, it's not like the market is going to be more robust where you're going to see multiple guys getting 12, 13, 14 million dollars. It's going to be interesting to see how much Saquon softens and whether the Giants are willing to come up a little bit more to be able to meet in the middle to keep Saquon Barkley, a New York Giant.
Yep, I keep coming back to it, man. We'll pay you a little bit more than what people are willing to on the market. We're just not going to pay you head over heels, right? Because it would just be to our own detriment. By the way, there's another talk about another episode about the Dave Gettleman scenario going back to the 2018 draft, and I'm not picking up any phone calls. More has come out about how, and this would have been terrible for the Broncos, although they're still looking for their quarterback. They wanted Sam Darnold so bad, they were willing to give up the house, and the lack of the willingness to pick up a phone prevented things from looking a lot different. For another day, as I said.
Adam, yeah, it's for another day, but think about that. Like, another team is like, we just want to tell you how much we're willing to give you. We're not saying you have to do it, but we're willing to just tell you how much of our war chest we're willing to give you. He's like, you know what? Like, he basically was like a 4-year-old child where he put his fingers in his ears and was like, la 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 la, like, I'm not listening. And it's just another ridiculous kind of statement, probably for the offseason, to talk about how messed up or how different things could have been.
Of course, man, but we won't go down that road. The other thing out of the Senior Bowl week here in terms of Joe Schoen comments came on the Daniel Jones. Now, this has kind of been alluded to again before this offseason. And then Patricia Traina for Sports Illustrated did a lot of coverage here, also Locked On Giants. And she said, no real surprise here. Shane said that the expectation remains that Daniel Jones will be the starting quarterback in camp this summer. This is contingent on whether Jones gets the green light from the medical staff as he continues his rehab from a torn ACL. So obviously, I'm a little bit hesitant to say, yes, the plan is to have him be the starter in camp. Expectations of him actually being available in camp are two different things. But when you hear this, let's tie it to, because we were having a discussion off the podcast, let's tie it to the draft. Unlike Saquon Barkley, you can say all the great things. It doesn't really matter in terms of those negotiations or what's going to happen going ahead. But with Daniel Jones, we know there's a lot of quarterbacks in this draft class. Maybe the Giants are going to want to move up if they can, or other teams behind them might want to go get a quarterback. What is your belief on the way Joe Schoen communicates about Daniel Jones and the intention of the QB position at 6, which he also said all options are open. We're keeping, nothing is off the table, but we do intend to have Daniel Jones as our starter.
Yeah, I think Joe Schoen has learned that you don't win any of these battles in the media. And, like, he uses really good words, like, it's the expectation. Like, the expectation is that Wink Martindale is going to be back. And then he storms out of Daboll's office and hops on a boat and is fishing in Jacksonville, right? It's the expectation that Daniel Jones will be our starter. Now, until things change or until they draft another quarterback or sign another quarterback, that is the expectation. Because guess what? It's just Daniel Jones and Tommy DeVito right now. So, like, if things were to happen today, the expectation is it will be Daniel Jones. But what I really think is more important is there's no point in tipping your hand. Why give leverage to potential free agent quarterbacks? Why give other teams a reason to jump you in the draft and leapfrog you to go get a player because they're worried you're going to take a quarterback? To me, he says every position's on the table, all options are on the table, and that's the way you should approach it, because you want to seem like no one knows what you're going to do, so they get worried and they may give you more draft capital to be able to either trade with you, move up, or maybe this, quarterback is saying, we know that you need a quarterback. You're the one that said it in the press conference. Give me an extra million or two on my contract because you need us so desperately.
Yeah, right. And you're speaking like free agency. If there's a
Yeah.
quarterback out there, draft, obviously everything is tiered out, and we know you're going to get what you get on your rookie contracts. Yeah, and to that extent of like, yeah, you want to keep all your options open. I'm not saying that Joe Shane's going to come out and say, we really need a quarterback. God, we are desperate, right? Because you're not going to say that, but more than that. This doesn't mean anything one way or the other. And I take it from like the global perspective. It's almost like the Dave Gettleman thing, right? Well, Dave Gettleman said, we're not going to answer the phone. We're going to draft Saquon Barkley. Nothing else matters. And it was like, oh, well, that certainly does send a message, doesn't it? It means you can be patient. But then guess what? You still had people calling him and saying, we want to offer you things. We want to move up in the draft. So in spite of a very direct statement from the GM at the time for the Giants, every other team was like, still going to make those calls, still going to plan as if it's possible that was all a smokescreen and gold jacket wearing be damned. They're going to take Sam Darnold, right? So you had to still plan accordingly as if everything is on the table. And that's kind of my point here. When you go into the draft, you can say whatever you want about Daniel Jones ahead of it. If the right quarterback falls to you, well, all of a sudden, like you said, expectations. The expectations are Daniel Jones will be our starter in camp. Well, it turns out, Caleb Williams fell to 6, in a world that doesn't exist. Well, so expectations change. We're drafting Caleb Williams. This has been a lot of fun. And if your other teams, I think to me too, because like they're at 6, top 3 quarterbacks, where do some of the other guys fall there? If you're not only competing against the Giants about wanting a quarterback, you're also competing against every other team that might want a quarterback. Right. So whether it's to the Giants who might want a quarterback or to 5 or to 4, you're going to be making all those moves and decisions predicated on everybody, not just the Giants, right? So this is a inside outlook as opposed to the global perspective that I think most teams have.
Well, and on top of that, Adam, you don't know how the top of the draft is going to shake out, right? Like you don't know. Well, his expectation is that Daniel Jones is a starter. If the Giants stand pat at 6 and all of a sudden Caleb Williams is available to you at the 6th draft pick, like maybe the expectations change, right? Like all of a sudden things can change drastically. But right now, as they see it, they probably think, Drake May, Caleb Williams, maybe Jaden Daniels are going to be off the board. So our expectation is Daniel Jones is there. Things can change where other teams have different priorities that they reprioritize things, as well as the Giants. So for me, I like leaving all options open on the table, picking up the phone when other people call you to potentially get more draft capital. That seems like a prudent thing to do as the GM. But ultimately, you are right. These are all little minutia, small things because it won't matter. If they want a quarterback, they will go get a quarterback. Expectations be damned, right?
Yeah, and let's just we use Caleb Williams as the fun example. Let's say it's Jaden Daniels that falls to 4. He doesn't go at 3, right? He's there at 5. Do the Giants want to move up, etc.? When we say Caleb Williams, it's just naming the QB. We understand he's likely to be the number 1 overall pick. So the context is something different happens in the top 3 picks than what expectations are right now, where 3 quarterbacks are going to go 1, 2, and 3 to the Bears, to the Commanders, and to the Patriots, respectively. The other little nugget then coming out of this conversation is the coaching search, which we talked about this, I think, a couple episodes ago of just, well, the Giants, they're waiting, they're being patient, but then you hear some kind of big names go off the board here. And one of the kind of presumptive leaders in the clubhouse for the defensive coordinator spot was Wilson coming over from the Ravens. But now you're hearing, not only before we even get to other teams that are in the mix there, but an interesting thing that was reported by Art Stapleton regarding like, where is the stature of Wilson in terms of DC coaching candidates if he might not even be in line within his own organization?
Yeah, it is interesting. Obviously we're starting to hear things. The Ravens have been eliminated, the Lions have been eliminated. So you're hearing now Ben Johnson interview, but he's going to stay. You're hearing Mike McDonald might be going to Seattle. He's getting closer on a potential deal. And then you'd think, Denard Wilson would presumably then take that spot. But I believe it's Weaver of the Ravens who was a defensive assistant coach, but was also the associate head coach to John Harbaugh. And Art Stapleton came out and said, actually, Denard Wilson isn't next in line to be able to take that over from Baltimore. It's someone else. So, don't think that he's presumably just going to get moved up the chain. remember, Denard Wilson spent time the last few years with the Philadelphia Eagles, has only been in the Ravens system for one season. So maybe there's not the same kind of continuity and loyalty that maybe you would expect. But it's an interesting footnote because Denard Wilson was interviewed, I believe, by the Packers. He's being interviewed by the Rams. He's had a whole host of defensive coordinator interviews. And it's not just the Giants saying, hey, we want you. It takes two to
Yes.
tango, and he might have different options available to him that may be more appealing than the Giants.
Yeah, so before we get to even some other names that have been taken off the list here as well, because they've either taken positions elsewhere. You mentioned there are a couple of other teams, Titans as well, but Packers, Rams, excuse me, those two teams alone right there. So Packers, up and coming team, took them a while to round into form, but they were regarded as a strong defensive unit ahead of the season and certainly started to get there. Team that seems to be on the rise, right? Gets into the playoffs, wins a game. That's impressive for them. And then on the Rams side of things, even though Matthew Stafford is closer to the end than the beginning, you have some older players. They got themselves young over the past couple of years, especially through the draft class. And that defensive side of the football has a lot of talent on it. If you are Denard Wilson, again, I want to elevate my profile. I want to start to be in a spot and maybe to get a head coaching interview at some point. I do wonder in that pecking order, I probably look, at least on paper right now, at the Rams, the Packers, and then the Giants. Probably the Titans, I would say, are in behind them because they have a little more uncertainty with their team overall. But, it's like, how attractive is the Giants' role? Whether or not Wink Martindale was the problem, you still have a little bit of that stink there, a lot of turnover. And I think if I'm just being objective, out of those four organizations, the Titans and the Giants are a tier below in terms of stability and expectations than the Rams and the Packers. And that matters when you're taking your first big leap from being a position coach to being a full-time defensive coordinator.
Well, and also there's a symbiotic relationship. You like that word, right? Symbiotic relationship between how well the offense performs and how good your defense can potentially look. And when you
Right.
look
That's
at
it. Right. Yeah.
You look at the Green Bay Packers. Jordan Love looks to be ascending. He won a playoff game. He embarrassed the Dallas Cowboys. The offensive side of the ball has young rookie talent, right? All of a
Mhm.
sudden, being the defensive coordinator there seems interesting because you're like, I don't need to shut everyone out in order to look like a good defensive coordinator. The same thing with the Rams. When you have Matt Stafford, Puka Nakua, Cooper Kupp, you have a whole Kyron Williams was awesome at running back. You have an offense that you sit there and say, wow, they're going to put points up on the board. I don't need to be perfect every game. You turn over
Yeah.
to the Giants and you may say, what's going on with their quarterback? What does their offense look like? Are they re-signing their most explosive player on offense? How many points are they going to be able to put up a game? If I'm the defensive coordinator here, am I going to have to give up 10 to 13 points to be able to be in games? Or like, am I going to have a little bit more flexibility? I think that's something that doesn't get discussed very much, Adam. But like, if you're a defensive coordinator, don't you want a team that's humming on offense? So like you do have the ability to make mistakes and it not be backbreaking?
Of course. And you mentioned a guy like Puka Nakua, right? We know how talented that team is overall, but remember where he was drafted and how good he looked in his rookie year, setting records. So you're also just looking and saying, well, how is the GM, right? How's the evaluation process? How is their scouting? Are they going to continue to give me more talent? Or is it going to be kind of these scenarios where hit and miss? It's not all on Joe Schoen, right? But okay, Deontay Banks hit, but we're not so sure about even late round pick like Trey Hawkins or getting linebackers and having over the last 2 years say, are these guys going to play? Are they going to be injury prone, right? There's going to be holes. We'll talk about free agency. The Giants roster is far more, up in the air right now. So if you're Denard Wilson, you're also like assessing where's my baseline talent level right now. And I don't know. It could be very good for the Giants. It could also be a bit of a question mark. So stability matters certainly inside of those conversations. I mentioned there Babich. He's going to go ahead and be he got elevated to the Bills defensive coordinator spot. So there are coaches coming off the board here. I want to continue to say that the Giants are being patient and waiting for the right guy. Ultimately, it's going to come down to whoever getting hired coming in, seeing how preseason looks, right? Seeing how they look early on in the season before we really get to determine it. But at least Denard Wilson seems to be having some buzz around him. That's a positive if it means you're in the mix for those positions. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it sounds like Denard Wilson has been a target for the Giants. Obviously, they've interviewed him multiple times. He feels like one of the top interviewees that they've had. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just going to say this on the defensive side of the ball. Don't be surprised, Adam, if Jerome Henderson ends up getting the
Yep. Yep.
job
Yep.
in-house. Maybe after all this turmoil, you turn around and you say, oh, it was just Wink Martindale, like kind of being crazy, like acting a fool, running amok. And Jerome Henderson was trying to keep some stability. has that consistency with a guy like Xavier McKinney if you want to re-sign him, has been part of the Deonte Banks progression that you hope to
Sure.
continue to see. Like, if they want some consistency and continuity, you give it to a guy like Jerome Henderson, who's already in house and can continue to build upon what you've already created.
Yeah, interesting thing there too is you don't have a lot of veteran leadership per se defensively, or it's just guys that just came in the door. Bobby Okereke is excellent. I wonder how much, and this is across NFL in general, if you have guys step up and say, "Hey, we really like Henderson. We love working with him, right? Especially the positional groups." And you have the sense that the defense overall is in support of him. If you already have him kind of as your 1A or 1B candidate, then I think keeping some stability, right? Mitigating some of that risk of changing systems entirely. That could be something the Giants take into account here as well. Back at the top, where it all began, which was the Senior Bowl and Joe Schoen. There were some standouts here, and I just wanted to highlight it from a positional group standpoint of saying, got to remember how fluid things can be, right? So we had talked a lot about at the top of the draft, Neighbors, right? If he ends up being there at 6, wow, what a stud player, wide receiver, being a position of value, looking at a Dunze even as well. But when you come out of this Senior Bowl and a couple of guys get highlighted here amongst some linebackers, they talk about Bo Nix a little bit here from a quarterback perspective. But when you hear guys like Roman Wilson out of Michigan, and then also Lad McConkey out of Georgia. I highlight McConkey because for a specific reason. When you go and look at him, and I tell you that from a measurable standpoint, right? Height, 36th percentile. Hands, 17th percentile. 40 time, 20th percentile. Weight, 17th percentile. Arms, 17th percentile. Nothing about him. Wingspan, 11th percentile. And by the way, lower is worse, higher is better. Not, 98th percentile is the ideal. None of the measurables seem to add up there. And yet, coming out of these practices at the Senior Bowl week, it goes on to say here in the wrap up, if anyone's sleeping on McConkey and whether or not he's capable of heading into the week of the Senior Bowl, they aren't anymore. The Bulldog star is a thoughtful route runner who attacks defenses with a well-defined route plan. On Tuesday, he was able to create separation left and right. His ability to uncover and make a tough catch should continue into day 2. This is a wide receiver that, by the way, is not being dismissed when it comes to the draft. He's 34th overall on DraftBuzz's big board. But when you think about route running, right, something the Giants may need to complement a Jalen Hyatt, the measurables, the size is a little concerning because the Giants don't have a big wide receiver group. But it's just the first reminder of, right, don't get so obsessed with what's going to go on at 6 that you forget about a very large talent pool at the back end of the first round into the second and third rounds as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Jordan Reed of ESPN, he's one of the draft analysts. He's been with them for a few years now. He said McConkey was one of the standouts, but as you mentioned, like one day of standing out versus all of the measurables that kind of are playing against him is really difficult. And you look
Yeah.
at someone, Jordan Reed also came out and said that Ricky Pearsall of the Florida Gators, wide receiver, 6'2", a little bit bigger of a body, a 4.5 40. He kind of grades out by NFL Draft Buzz as an 85.2, which is pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
He's another guy that stands out. He's got more of the measurables than you look at. His some of his strengths, just reading off of NFL Draft Buzz and understanding, they say being able to separate, they say he plays a little bit better in the slot than other places. But to your point, these are guys that are not the Malik Neighbors, the Roman Dunzes that are going to be in the first round. These are guys that you're looking at to say, hey, Shea Tierney, hey, Mike Kafka, Joe Schoen, do they fit what you're trying to do? Can we get them in the 4th round? Can we get them in the 3rd round? That's really what the Senior Bowl is about. We're going to talk ad nauseum about the top 10 to 15 picks, but these are the types of guys that fill out the roster that you hope to find someone like a Puka Nacua later on, where it kind of covers up the fact that maybe you don't have top-end talent at some positions.
Yeah, Pearsall 72nd overall right now, right? So you're talking about 3rd round talent. Does he stay there? Does he fall a little bit? Do other guys rise above him? Finding value. We're going to have a lot of, again, be here on Friday for our follow-up episode talking about free agency, because the Giants are going to potentially lose 20 plus players to free agency to whatever degree they contributed this past season and the holes that it's going to create for them. They have a lot of needs here. And I like the idea, as you say, finding complementary pieces to what you want to accomplish on both sides of the football. It's not just about what's their skill set. It's how does it fit in and how does it complement us? So some takeaways there, obviously, we'll continue to highlight, guys. And remember, as Andy said, It's one day in a Senior Bowl week of practices. It's not the entire collegiate career. It's not the combine. All these things are going to inform us as well. That being the case, Friday, it will be free agency, going through where's the cap for the New York Football Giants? What are the critical positions they need to fill? But we're going to put in the context of this top 50 free agents. Where's Saquon Barkley? Is Xavier McKinney on that list too? How much emphasis do the Giants need to put on bringing them back? Are there free agents that we might find attractive? Oh, it's going to be a juicy one. That's why you get over to YouTube. You subscribe and turn on the alerts so you know when we're going live with our episodes. You get us on the podcast feed as well. You follow us on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at AndyMac214, at Adam Armbrecht. And if you can, if there's a place to leave a 5-star review, go ahead and do it. Support us and support our sponsors because that really helps us grow. It means the world to us, 100% free for you, but really helps us move this little engine along. That being the case, Andy, until that next time, as you would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.